morality a great deal, and I know that in autobiography research there was a big controversy that came out about false autobiographies, but political autobiographies by people. There was Rigoberto Menchú, for example, who won the Nobel Prize, and then afterwards someone dug around and found that there were falsehoods in her autobiography, and one of the defenses that she used was, well, I was dealing with oral culture, and the people who went and dug up these contrafactual items were going into the archives of the government, and we're getting these out of the written culture and the archival culture, which was an officially sanctioned set of facts as well. And I didn't know to what degree the issue of orality played a role in terms of the veracity of what your father was saying, as contrasted with...
Absolutely, and part of me wants to apologize for how big the book is, but there are a lot of issues that come up in the book, and these issues of oral culture are explored there. And two things that relate to what you're saying are, what is the purpose of telling a story in an oral culture? And that's different from the purpose of telling a story in a literate culture and telling a story in a written form. And one of the dimensions of that, without trying to simplify too much, but one dimension of that is that telling a story in oral culture has to do with passing on a piece of knowledge that's vital to being able to survive. And there's a beautiful illustration of that I didn't fabricate. It just came my way, fell into my lap, so to speak, because our oldest sister, Maria, we're very close in age. We are 4 girls born in 4 years. But even 1 or 2 years can make a huge difference when it comes to cognitive ability. And our sister Maria had many, many stories than any of the rest of us. And she remembered my father telling stories much more than any of the rest of us remembered that. And one thing she remembered that I really did not remember myself, even though I'm only 2.5 years younger, is our father, first of all, us eating a certain kind of vegetable. Greeks like to gather wild greens, sort of the way people eat dandelion leaves. It's a delicacy here in Berkeley, I believe. Well, Greeks gather something that they call horta. It's a certain kind of wild thing that grows, and it's boiled, and if you're lucky enough to have olive oil and lemon, you put some olive oil and lemon on it. In his case, they were just lucky enough to have the horta. And evidently, when we were little, my mother would go out and gather something that resembled Greek horta, and we were fed this quite a lot. I remember more recently eating this vegetable, but not that we ate it. And my sister, there's a very funny part, there actually are a few funny parts in the book, and there's a very funny part where my sister is talking to me about how, we ate a lot more horta than the average American diet. And I start laughing when she tells me this, because I like horta, and I say to her, so do you not like this stuff? And she says, well, I've gotten a little more used to it. But what the interesting part in terms of oral culture is, she said that every time we were given that food, our father would yell at us and say, you have to know what can keep you alive. Okay? So you have to know if you were, in this situation, and he doesn't say what the situation is, but he says you have to know how to find things that can keep you alive. And so every time my sister eats this vegetable, she feels like she's swallowing my father's admonitions to know what you can find in the wild that will keep you alive. And that's very, very poignant for me. And I think it's an illustration of how repetition in oral culture is meant to teach you very specific lessons about survival. And so the efficacy of the story is not whether it's true. It's whether it teaches you the lesson that you need to know in order to keep you alive. So in that regard, my father did a hell of a job, because that's exactly what Maria remembered. And to get it off the family a little bit, my father's friends, my father was a school teacher in a public school system, and while I was working in the early stages of working on this book, I was reconnected with my high school math teacher, whom I had not seen for sure in 25 years. And we're sitting at lunch, and I'm kind of in a state of shock, because he was a very special man, and he actually was a German Jew, and I didn't know that about him when I was his student, but I've done all this work on the Holocaust, and I was thinking this amazing opportunity that I've reconnected with his teacher, and he can share with me things that I'll be interested in. And what does he do? He starts relating my father's story. And I was so shocked because not only did he not know I was working on this project, but he hadn't seen my father also in 25 years because he had moved out of the area about the time I graduated from high school. So I just thought, wow, Dad did a great job because 25 years later, Mr. Simon comes out with this story, and I jotted it down. Unfortunately, I did not have my tape recorder with me, but I will try to convince you that he used the same words in the same sequence that my father would tell this story in. So he was a very effective storyteller on some level, right, to do certain kinds of things, one of which was to have people remember the stories. Yes?
Did your father insist that his children go to a Greek Orthodox school, or did you go to public schools then?
Well, we grew up in White Plains, New York, and White Plains actually did not have very many Greeks. And I used to always think that was coincidental, but after doing this research, I'm actually wondering a little bit at how we ended up in one place close to New York City that hardly has any Greeks. So I really don't know. There was a Greek church. My father was actually one of the founding members that was started a couple of towns over from us. And my parents actually lived there. They were sort of guardians of the grounds for a few years when they were very poor. Young couple with 2 young children. I wasn't even born yet. And we continued to go to that church. And for a while they had a Greek school there, and we were not very good at it. And there's a whole sort of Greek-American thing that goes on too, and the whole language question. I don't know if we want to get into that. But we actually did not have a lot of contact with Greeks other than our relatives. We saw my dad did an amazing job, even though he did have very little money, and he was the only person who drove in our family for many years. He did take us to see our grandparents, his parents, all those cousins, my mother's brother, the one who had originally met, his family. So he did quite a good job of helping us stay in touch. But we did not have the kind of Greek upbringing that I found out a lot of other people had. We were told always we were Greeks, and especially whenever we were supposed to do something that we weren't looking forward to, he always said, we're a Greek family, and this is the way a Greek family does it. And I point that out in the book. Maria, I think
I wanted to say something. It's sort of, for me, it's very interesting. Your book is really very interesting. I've read only parts of it, but I will read the rest of it for sure. The one issue that struck me is the issue of history. Who owns history here? I mean, to what extent a child's experience of history, which is an assimilation of history on all levels, the emotional, the imaginary, the social, whatever level allows for the survival of a child involved in history, to what extent that really proclaims an ownership of history. In other words, your father perfectly well owned his history. However he experienced it, the way he experienced it, the way he remembered it, it was all his. He had no reason to feel ashamed, to check the facts. For him, that was the history he experienced. So I think this is very interesting.
I'm very taken with what you said, but explain a little bit more to me. Did you get the impression I was trying to take his history away from him? Or,
no. I think to me, certainly for everyone, your book sort of can have different kind of reverberations. For me, that was the thing that actually struck me. Beyond the stories, beyond which stories are true or which stories are not true, how your father really understood history. And I think that sort of proclaims the way that the history narratives are written. A history narrative is written by someone who's not involved with history, who simply recounts the facts. Is very, very different from a history narrative, someone who is involved with history, who has experienced the events, and particularly a child.
I would agree with you on that. On the other hand, we have a whole body of theory. Hayden White was teaching not very far from here, and his whole idea that history too is historical writing is constructed, and that we have to look at it as